the people will feel they have no option other than to take action into their own hands rather than rely on political leaders who are doing nothing in their eyes.
Britain just crossed a line it may not be able to uncross, as thousands of convicts are released back onto the streets and the country erupts in what looks dangerously close to open revolt. Crime is surging, and public anger is boiling over as faith in law and order collapses in real time. This is a brutal experiment with public safety, and the consequences are already exploding.
Below the surface, however, lies a growing sense that the United Kingdom is coming apart at the seams.
Prison used to carry weight in Britain. It was supposed to mark a clear boundary between those who followed the rules and those who shattered them. That boundary has now been wiped away. With the introduction of the SDS-40 scheme, punishment quietly lost its meaning. Under this policy, criminals serve just 40% of their sentence and then walk free. There was no public vote, no serious national debate, and no consent from the people who would have to live with the consequences. More than 40,000 convicted offenders were released, not because they were rehabilitated, but because the system could no longer contain them.
But they've been very well publicized, and there's been a whole right-wing machine ready to capitalize on it, to post about it online, and to attract protests.
The impact was immediate and impossible to ignore. Crime did not rise slowly or subtly. It surged by 27% in a matter of weeks. That kind of jump does not happen by accident. It happens when pressure is released all at once. This was not reform. It was a rupture. British justice crossed a line and did not come back. Once the gates opened, they did not just release inmates. They released fear, instability, and a sense that the state had lost control.
His argument is this, that first of all, Britain displays many of the signs of being a failed state, such as economic decline, total loss of trust in the police, and a fractious and increasingly extreme politics.
SDS-40 was presented as a logistical necessity, but in reality, it was an emergency evacuation. Britain's prisons were operating at between 99 and 99.9% capacity. There was no margin for error. Officials inside the justice system were not making careful moral decisions. They were being forced into an impossible corner: empty the cells or watch the entire prison estate collapse. Risk assessments were sidelined unless the offender posed a political problem. If you were not high profile or embarrassing, you were eligible to leave. That is why the opposition's warning hit so hard. For career criminals, the door was open. That was not an exaggeration. That was the policy playing out exactly as designed. The consequences exploded into the open in London. At 7:15 in the evening, protesters gathered and demanded the dissolution of Parliament and the resignation of Keir These were not abstract slogans. The accusations were direct and furious. People were shouting that rapists had been released, that machete attackers were back on the streets, and that the government had chosen criminals over ordinary citizens. At 7:32, the situation escalated sharply when riot suppression vans were ambushed with officers still inside. This was no longer a protest that could be managed with crowd control. It was an eruption. Police issued a 1-hour ultimatum to disperse. The crowd refused. By 8:19, fireworks were being fired directly at police platoons. This was not symbolic anger. It was physical confrontation.
When you have a country in decline and you add large numbers of new people into the mix, what you end up with is ethnic conflict over resources.
Imagine Northern Ireland scale, or Northern Ireland in intensity, but on a completely national scale. Attacks on public figures, judges, potentially politicians.
The numbers tell the story of that night. 8 police vans burned, 87 arrests, 134 people hospitalized. Reinforcements were rushed in from the few remaining regions that were not already overwhelmed. That is what loss of control looks like. Not a dramatic announcement, but a sudden vacuum where authority used to be. Then came the address to the nation. Starmer pointed to a statistic meant to steady the public. 11,000 criminals had been recalled to prison this year. Instead of reassurance, it ignited outrage. The question landed instantly and brutally. If 11,000 failed to reintegrate, what are the other 30,000 doing right now? That was not political spin. That was basic logic.
The people will feel they have no option other than to take action into their own hands rather than rely on political leaders who are doing nothing in their eyes. So yeah, I think there's every likelihood. I don't know what the time frame is, but I would go far as to predict not just civil unrest, but
Behind the scenes, the system is seizing up. Judges are privately admitting their hands are tied. How do you jail a grooming gang member when every prison is bursting at the seams? How do you sentence a violent offender when transport vans have nowhere to take them? Serious cases involving rape, armed robbery, and manslaughter are being delayed until 2027. Victims are being told to wait while their attackers walk free on bail. Probation systems are collapsing. GPS tags fail. Offenders go missing inside the system. The government calls it a logistical hiccup. In reality, it is a national security failure.
Latest crime stats are out, and the UK, well, unfortunately, it's a playground for criminals.
Insiders are now issuing warnings that cannot be ignored. Capacity sits at 99.9%. Beds emptied on Tuesday are filled again by Thursday. Analysts inside the Ministry of Justice are saying operational safety cannot be guaranteed for another week. One major riot away from total arrest paralysis. Holding cells full. Vans booked. Courts frozen. This is not governance. It is crisis management without a solution. The most dangerous outcome of all is the message being sent. That crime is negotiable. That justice is flexible. That if pressure builds high enough, the state will blink first. Britain did not just release prisoners. It released control, and once control is gone, history shows it is never easy to reclaim. That's when Britain didn't just get angry, because while criminals are leaving prison to luxury convoys, ordinary citizens are learning a very different lesson. Say the wrong thing online, and suddenly the system remembers how punishment works. And it gets worse. Drug dealers are openly laughing in courtrooms because they understand the loophole better than anyone else. They know the prisons are full. They know the transport vans are booked. They know that even if they're convicted, the odds are high they'll be back on the street before the paperwork cools down. Justice hasn't disappeared. It's been put on a waiting list. This is what total system paralysis looks like. Violent offenders are being bailed, not because they're safe, but because there is nowhere to send them. Serious crimes like rape, armed robbery, and manslaughter are being pushed back to 2027. That's not a typo. Victims are being told to wait years while their attackers walk free under supervision schemes that even probation officers admit are broken. And probation really is broken. GPS tags are failing. Batteries die. Replacements don't arrive. Thousands of offenders are technically missing inside the system. Not escaped, just untracked. The government calls it a logistical hiccup. Everyone else calls it a nightmare. Police officers arrest the same people over and over again. By afternoon, they're back on the street. Morale collapses. Enforcement narrows to one thing only: immediate threat to life. Everything else slides. That's why theft is practically legal now. Vandalism barely registers. Shop owners stop calling the police because they already know how the story ends. Insurance companies are pulling out of entire areas because they trust spreadsheets more than ministerial promises. The police aren't lazy, they're exhausted. Why risk your career and your safety for a system that refuses to back you up? Then comes the subject nobody in government wants to touch without gloves: foreign national offenders. More than 10,000 of them are sitting in British prison cells. Deportation orders already signed, flights planned, and then cancelled. Again and again. Not because it's impossible, because it's politically uncomfortable. Every deportation flight that could free up space gets grounded to avoid a legal fight or bad headlines. Nigel Farage throws a match on the fuel by proposing mass deportations, arguing it could free up as much as 40% of prison capacity overnight. Starmer shuts it down instantly. Intolerant, unworkable, end of discussion. Meanwhile, small boats keep crossing during the chaos, adding pressure to a system that's already cracking. The message is clear, whether intended or not. Britain is open, and not just for asylum seekers.
Put the money in. Give me that money. Yo.
Yep, theft up 13%. 2.9 million theft incidents.
Organized crime has noticed. Gang members operate openly now. Luxury Bentleys and Lamborghinis outside prison gates are no longer shocking. They're expected. Probation supervision is openly admitted to be ineffective. Magistrates are being told to bail violent offenders because the vans are full. Britain has quietly become one of the most comfortable places in Europe for organized crime to operate. Not because criminals are clever, but because the system is generous. And here's the most uncomfortable truth of all. Criminals understand the rules better than the public does. They know how close the system is to collapse. They know the thresholds. They know the pressure points. They know that the state is afraid to admit it has lost control. So, they push. And every time the state blinks, they push a little harder. This is where the story turns uncomfortable, because Keirstarmer is not some wide-eyed amateur who wandered into Downing Street by accident. This is a former director of public prosecutions, the so-called top cop. The man who spent years putting criminals behind bars. He campaigned on competence, order, and control. He promised to smash gangs and secure borders. And yet, here we are, watching him use that same legal expertise not to enforce the law, but to explain why it can't be enforced. The prosecutor didn't fix the system. He unlocked the cells. Somehow, the man who should have been crime's worst enemy has become its most useful asset. And the worst part is, there is no backup plan. So here's the question that won't go away. When the state stops enforcing the law, who steps in next?